And the courts set Harrington free after 22 years on the basis that his constitutional rights were violated. 22 years later, they didn't accept or didn't, in the judgment, consider the brain fingerprinting evidence, but they read it and they could see the results, but they didn't give any credence to it because they didn't want to just be the first to validate a science.
Hey everyone, welcome to Murder Was the Case Hangout. This is going to be a very cerebral, scientific one. Get away from some of the gore and gallows humor because I have two distinguished doctors with me today. I have from the University of Canterbury, Dr. Robin Palmer, and Dr. Michel Funicelli, who kind of came up with me at the same time through Concordia University. Michel was doing forensic psych purely. And I remember from, I think the first year where we were speaking with each other, you were telling me about this new way to catch people. It's like lie detection, but it's different. And you explained to me you can see if somebody has a memory. And at the time you were talking about this machine somewhere, and I was thinking, oh, this is never going to work. And now here we are. And so let's talk about that. So gentlemen, why don't you introduce yourselves? We'll start with Dr. Palmer. May I call you Robin throughout this?
Yeah, call me Robin. So this is my title is professor, not doctor. In fact, not that anything turns on that, but I have a couple of master's degrees. I don't have the PhD.
Oh,
but,
sorry about that.
So, yes, Lee, I've been working on, and that's how I got to know Michel as well, on this for a number of years. I'm a practitioner. I've done about 300 murder trials in my time, and a number of other high-profile trials. And I've also run a course in forensic investigation, which is the various aspects of investigating crime. And then I came across the originator of this technology in the United States, a guy called Larry Farwell, about 20 years ago. And I became interested in his research. And to cut a long story short, we did a collaborative project with him from 2016 to 2020 at the University of Canterbury, where I'm currently based, and to verify this. And we have completed the testing and the experiments over 3 or 4 years. We have shared some of it with Michel, and I've been working with Michel in Australia on similar stuff. And so we're now busy publishing the results. And Michel has done similar stuff, and he will explain what he's done.
Okay, Michel, introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Michel Funicelli. I'm speaking to you right now from Canada. I did study or work in Australia, where Robin and I met face to face. But yes, so Robin has been using a certain protocol in this memory detection technique, and we'll get into the more details, I suppose, in a minute or so. But I learned another protocol under the guidance and tutorship of Professor Peter Rosenfeld out of Northwestern University in Chicago, where I spent a couple of months in 2015 in his laboratory to learn the rudiments of his protocol. And basically, how I came to know about Robin's work was a bit by accident, because I remember I had all these alerts, these Google alerts on my computer, and one term or a couple of terms that I had was brain fingerprinting. And lo and behold, one day I get this pop-up alert that from my alert that a conference was to be held. And correct me if I'm wrong, Robin, but I think it was a summer or our summer anyway, 2018 maybe. And then I was not able to attend. I did not have enough free annual leave left at my work from my employer, and so I emailed the organizers of that conference to be held in New Zealand, and asking if I could get maybe the presentations sent to me, since I was not able to attend. And a person did write back, and it was Robin Palmer who wrote back saying that he was interested in my type of work, and there we've been emailing ever since.
Excellent. So you've made your introductions, and so let's dial it right back now. So we're going to start by explaining this to me like I'm 18 and working at a car wash. We'll do it like
Okay.
that. Okay. So brain fingerprinting.
I think your 18-year-old at the car wash would probably be in a much better position to understand this than most people, because they're usually technologically quite savvy.
Right.
But in a nutshell, as Michel said, there are three different systems which all do the same thing. And I'll sort of start with what's generic to all three systems, and then we can go on to explain how the interpretation is different. So if you consider the medical technology of the EEG, that works by detecting electrical brain waves in the brain. So if you have an EEG for medical purposes, that exact same technology is used for this forensic application, forensic in the sense of for legal purposes and for investigative purposes.
Okay, so tracking how electricity maneuvers through parts of the brain.
That's right. So everything that you do, every stimulus you see creates an electrical brain wave in your brain.
Right.
And those brain waves can be measured. And we are particularly interested in one brainwave called the P300. And the P300 brainwave, well, I'll use the layman's terms, I won't use the technical terms of the P300 brainwave is a brainwave, electrical brainwave that is detected 300ths of a second after the stimulus meaning something you see or something you look at or something that you notice in the brain.
Just to stop you there. So is it only visual, or is it any sensory stimulus?
Well, for our purposes, visual.
But it
either
could,
seeing a statement.
Yeah, but it could hypothetically be something else.
Yeah, it could be anything.
Okay.
But the linguistics uses this particular brainwave quite a lot because it's a well-known stimulus which you can measure in the brain. And to really simplify things, the technology, and I'm here dealing with both Farwell system, Rosenfeld system, which is the one that Michel did his PhD in, and there's a BEOS system, BEOS, brain electrical oscillation signature system, which is developed in India. All three systems rely on the detection of this P300 brainwave. And how it works in essence, and to simplify it quite a lot, this process is not a lie detector, it is a knowledge detector. So what we're trying to detect is if somebody has some knowledge in their brain of a certain incident or crime or whatever, doesn't detect whether they're lying or telling the truth. However, it has got forensic application in the sense that if you tell me that you did not do it or weren't present at the scene, and I can detect in your brain that you have knowledge of key aspects of that scene, then forensically I can challenge you and say, well, you told me you weren't there, but your brain says otherwise. Please explain yourself. So in that sense, it has forensic application, but it can't tell you whether you're lying about something. or not.
Well, it can tell you if you're lying about what you said you know or don't know.
Exactly. So you can confront somebody with what the brain says compared to what they said.
Yeah.
So that's the first point. So it's a knowledge detector and not a lie detector.
Yeah.
The second point, I think, and it'd be very simplified, is that when you look at the screen interpreting the results, whichever system you use, if your brain detects something, it will form a peak, a kind of a peak response. If your brain does not detect that knowledge, it will flatline. That's in very simple terms. So we see a peak response, it means your brain has recognized that item of information or that picture or whatever we showed you. If it flatlines, it basically says your brain has not recognized that. So in very simple terms, taking the firewall system, and of course, Michel can explain the amplitude approach of Rosenthal system, which is a slightly different interpretational approach. Let's say, for example, you sit in your studio right now, Ellie, okay, and look around. You can see your microphone, you can see your chairs, you can see the color of the walls, you can see the monitor, you can see what the make is of the monitor. So you have a lot of information of what's happening in your studio, okay?
Yeah.
And let's say, are you the only person who have access to your studio, or do other people have access to your studio?
No, I would say there are two people with daily familiarity, and then there's about 3 other people that have been in here. Yeah.
So let's say we got 5 people who have knowledge of what your studio looks like. So we have 5 suspects, all right?
Okay.
And let's say there was $10,000 in your drawer in the studio, okay? And you come back to do this podcast, you open the drawer and the $10,000 is gone. All right, so only the 5 people who had access to your studio would probably know about the $10,000 whereabouts. Do you agree with me so far?
In the absence of any other evidence of ransacking, sure, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's make that assumption, okay? So now the investigator comes in, Michel or myself, and we will do an investigation of who knew what. And in particular, we will have a look inside that drawer and see what else was in that drawer. $10,000 was there. There could have been a red stapler. There could be a set of keys. There could be all kinds of things in there, which nobody had reason to open that drawer in the studio for. So we can assume that the person who took the $10,000 looked in the drawer, saw the money, and then took it, correct? So the way we would test for that, and this is very simplified, of course,
yes,
is to say, okay, we want to detect everybody who has knowledge of what was inside that drawer where the $10,000 was. And those, so we must have opened the drawer because the stuff was put in yesterday, for example, okay? So we will test all 5 people, and in our system, we would do a series of questions based on our investigation. We will have target questions, and those will be questions that all 5 people know about. They know what the studio looks like. They know it's got a desk in it. They know the color of the walls. Is there a picture on the walls? All that kind of stuff. So those will be your target questions, which are the surrounding circumstances of the crime or the incident. Okay. Then we'll take a number of questions based on what was inside that drawer. The money was there, for example. Okay, $10,000. How was it packed? Did they have a rubber band around it? Was it inside a white folder? Was it a note on it? With a set of keys next to it, with the red stapler? So all the stuff in the drawer and the nature of how it was packed, the $10,000, would then become information which we call probe information for our purposes.
So you're setting them up, just like
That's right.
like in interrogation, you kind of you let them go and go and go, and
okay, you're getting slightly ahead of it because it's not quite that simple. So we'll have a set of questions based on what everybody knows about the studio and the surrounding circumstances. Then we'll have a set of questions based on what was inside the drawer, how the money was packed, how it was secured, etc., etc. And then we'll choose a set of irrelevant questions which have got nothing to do with your studio or the money or anything. You know, igloos in Alaska and all kinds of other things which got nothing to do with it, irrelevant questions. All right. We then mix all these questions up in one series of questions, let's say 60 or 70 questions. And we have them at random spots, so they're not in sequence. So we'll have the targets, the probes, and the relevant questions all mixed up together. All right? In this series of questions.
Mhm.
That's then loaded onto the computer together with images or pictures where necessary, make pictures of the studio, etc. And we then bring in every one of those 5 people one by one, and they sit in front of the computer and they are asked, and concentration is crucial to this entire exercise, as Michel will tell you. They are asked to click on anything they recognize and on with the left hand, and click on the right hand stuff they don't recognize. So they recognize something, they click on it. Now remember, this clicking of either I do recognize or don't recognize it has 2 functions. First purpose is just to ensure they concentrate on what they see on the screen and what they read, okay? Because the brain is going to detect what they see anyway, whether they click or don't click. It's merely to ensure concentration. That's the one thing. The other thing is, if we videotape you and you're clicking, I know nothing about this with your left hand, and the brain shows on that particular stimulus you knew about it because the brain says you did, that's evidence that you are trying to deceive us. Okay. So all 5 people will come in, and let's assume you took the money. Not that I'm imputing any criminal activity to you. And
this
you're
is like
the one of the
staging, kind of like Jussie Smollett kind of situation.
I beg your pardon?
Is this like a staging Jussie Smollett? Hey, someone stole my money, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jesse seems to have got away with it, but be that as it may,
yeah.
I'm still wondering how he managed to do that. Anyway, so a very similar kind of thing. So let's say you took it.
Yeah.
In fact, I caught somebody out in South Africa exactly on that basis. It was a deputy manager, and they tried to blame the cleaners. Anyway, that's another issue. So now it comes, I test all 5 of you, and the other 4 people flatline on the probe questions. What was in the drawer, how it was packaged, and all the rest of it. But your brain peaks on those probe questions because it recognizes how it was packed and what was in the drawer, etc., etc. So we can then, with great accuracy, say, you knew about what was in that drawer. Now, there are 2 issues here. Either you had innocent knowledge and that you opened the drawer, saw the money, and didn't touch it, or you opened the drawer, saw the money, and took it. But at least you've got some explaining to do.
Yes.
So in simple terms, that's how that system works. The only difference between this system and, as Michel will tell you, his system, or the system he investigated, is how you interpret the results.
Okay.
And of course, his system does not have the targeting. They have a slightly different approach, which he'll explain in a moment. But it's still based on that brainwave.
Okay, so I just need to clarify something. So these
Sure.
questions are accompanied by an image of the
Not always. Sometimes it's just a statement. It's just a statement because remember, if I say to you, if I put on the computer screen for you, Barack Obama was president in those years. What immediately happens in your brain, it converts the name Barack Obama into an image in your brain in any event.
Yeah, you're right. You can. It's like don't see.
So whether you have a picture of Barack Obama, right, or you have the statement, is still going to reflect in the brain in the same way. But we do try and mix up images and words, but we have to be very careful because the brain is quite sensitive. And when I met with Michel in Australia, we did a look at these experiments, and we got a distinct difference between an image which was very vague and one which was very precise in the brain response, for example. So one has to be very careful of the kinds of images you use. Because remember, and I'm just digressing slightly here, for the brain to process an image is a lot more brain work than to process a statement. Because they've got to look at all the various things to try and interpret, is this ambiguity here? Is that really that person? So there's a lot of brain work happening before you can actually detect the response, whereas with a statement is quite quick. So we tend to focus more on statements than on images if we can.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good because I was thinking of like, let's say there was some Tic Tac mints in the drawer, right? Now, I've seen Tic Tac mints in my life. but it doesn't mean I saw them in that drawer. Something like, let's say a very common knife was used in a murder, something like that. I may have seen a knife that looks just like that. It could be even by the same manufacturer, but it isn't the weapon. So what do you do about that? And how does that work?
A very short answer to that is that everything is done in context. So in other words, the way the questions are framed and the sequence would be contextualized to the incident. So things will say in the drawer on the right-hand side, top drawer was a packet of Tic Tacs, or Tic Tacs was in the drawer, or something like that. So you contextualize it. So it wouldn't be in general Tic Tacs you've seen anywhere. That's one way of doing it. But
and that's the helpfulness of putting it in a statement rather than just showing.
That's right.
Got it.
That's right. So the statements have been very carefully worded and be very simplified, so there's not too much brain work going on. Because remember, this is a very sensitive procedure, and if the brain is asked to do too much work, you do not get accurate results.
Okay.
Maybe Michel could just tell us how his system differs slightly from that system, and we can see how they compare the two systems.
Sure, and that was beautifully explained, Robin. So before we do that, Hal in the comments says, at the moment, he doesn't see how it could be used as admissible evidence. Are we just looking to elicit a confession?
All right, I can answer that very quickly. Admissibility on the doorway principles, which is the US principle, which is adopted in New Zealand in the Lundy case and Australia as well, have certain criteria. We won't go into legal criteria at this stage, but the one criterion that has not yet been fully accepted worldwide is general scientific acceptance.
Right.
And therefore admissibility in court is difficult, although it has been admitted in the Supreme Court of Iowa, and expert evidence has been laid in a case there, which I can deal with a bit later. So the admissibility and the legal side is going through the very same process we went through years back with DNA evidence. If you know the history of DNA evidence, it was poo-pooed by the scientific community, or many members of it, saying this is junk science, you can't use it. It was 20 years after 1953 when Crick and Watson first isolated DNA. In 1988, it was first used in court. It's a long process to persuade the law that something's got some value.
Yes, and that's what you guys are on the front lines of. I mean,
exactly.
You are meeting the pioneers here tonight, guys. So, I mean, this stuff is fascinating. That was always my question to Michel earlier on. I mean, we were talking like 8 years ago when you and I were discussing this, Michel, and I was like, what have I seen the knife before? Because I was trying to always break it, but now I'm seeing how you can't if you situate it in the perfect number of symbols or signs. Let's put it that way, right? If you by itself, I can see how you can trip, but alongside a couple other things to contextualize it, now I'm getting sold.
Lee, may I just cut in here?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'd like to just add a few details to what Robin has mentioned about this P300. In the scientific literature right now, the scientists have been able to isolate several brainwave components. P300, and by the way, I just want to dissect what P300 means. Robin alluded to the 300, which is the latency in milliseconds. And P stands for positive. You know, the typical Earth's cycle, you have negatives and positive. Well, P means a positive deflection that occurs at about anywhere from 300 to roughly 600-700. It's never exactly the exact same spot, but it occurs at this peak that Robin is talking about occurs, generally speaking, anywhere between 300 to 600-700 milliseconds after a person has been exposed to a stimulus. Now, if I can just put out this analogy to people listening in or looking in, we've all been exposed at some point in our life. When we're in a crowd, think of a social gathering somewhere in a social setting, and let's say you and I, Lee, are drinking and having a drink, and we're in a garden party, and then all of a sudden, someone says off to the side, someone mentions your name, Lee, and so yeah. By the way,
Yeah.
exactly. So if we had the electrodes placed on your scalp at that exact moment, and we had an electroencephalogram or EEG set aside, we would see a greater amplitude level occurring at that exact same moment of roughly 300 to 600 milliseconds after you've heard your name mentioned.
Yeah.
And you're in that, and that's basically, and I'll just digress here a little bit to maybe offer people listening in the history behind this brainwave. It did not occur yesterday. It basically it stems from all the way back to 1927, and people may know this scientist named Ivan Pavlov. Classical conditioning.
Pavlov's dogs, yeah.
Exactly, his dogs and everything. Well, he's the one who discovered, if I may use those terms, this reflex, and it is a cerebral reflex, which occurs when someone is exposed to a novel and meaningful stimuli. So novel in a sense that it's novel to the situation. So again, getting back to the example of you and I having a drink on an outside garden party. So we're talking about something else, or a trip that we took, whatever, and then novel to this conversation, to this environment that's happening in your head, you hear your name mentioned. Yeah, by the way, blah blah blah, Lee did this and did that.
When you're not expecting to hear it. So if you're saying, Lee, I'm expecting to hear it, but I wasn't expecting to hear that woman whose voice I don't recognize say it.
Right.
Got it.
So that's novel in that sense, and also meaningful, because of course your first name has meaning to you. Mm-hmm. So it's novel and meaningful. So basically, this was called by Pavlov the orienting reflex. And it goes back to even further. Think of the African prehistoric man when he was walking around the jungle in Africa, and basically he was hunting or moving about, but then he would hear a sound, and of course that sound is novel to his environment because he's walking quietly in the savannah, and so he hears a sound, and then of course that's novel to the environment. And now whether it's meaningful or not, because he had to be alert to all these sounds to determine whether it was friend or foe. So whether that branch cracking somewhere was from a dangerous animal or not. So or friendly kind of noise. So he had to make that determination. So that orienting reflex is built in. It's wired into our body. Yeah. Exactly. So, but it took many years, but only until 1927 that Ivan Pavlov basically discovered in his laboratory from his work in his dogs. Next came the next crucial step in the history of this P300 came about 1959 by an American researcher called David Lycan, and basically David Lycan invented this test called the concealed information test, and basically he did not have a electrical brain apparatus at that time. He wanted to develop a test where where he could identify whether someone would recognize a crucial piece of evidence as a because he was questioning the validity of another test used with the polygraph, and but he was still thinking about the so-called polygraph. And the polygraph, by the way, you can use many types of tests. And the test that he invented was the concealed information test. And basically, the concealed information test works as follows. And people have seen this on crime TV shows, I'm sure. When the police shows a victim the face of a suspect, that it's mixed in, it's assorted with other photos of basically irrelevant looking persons.
Yeah.
So only one person out of that assortment of maybe 6 or 8 pictures is the crucial suspect. So that's the concealed information test. So one key element of the crime, called the probe, assorted with other neutral alternatives. In this case, 6 or 7 other insignificant looking faces.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the concealed information test. But that test can be applied to many other things. As Robin was talking about the crime scene and with the money in your desk drawer, well, that same logic can be applied to a murder weapon. If a murder weapon is left at the crime scene, let's say a knife is left at the crime scene, so that becomes, if the police authorities determine that only the author of the crime and the police authorities know about this murder weapon, and it's not leaked out to the press, so that becomes a really pertinent crime detail. So then the police arrest a suspect, and they put him or her through this concealed information test while the person is wired or hooked up with electrodes on his or her head, and they show him or her this knife assorted with other neutral alternatives. It could be a gun, a handgun,
a different type of knife.
Or well, it could be. Now that's now you're entering into a very fine area where the science around these tests that we're talking about has not really come to a definitive answer yet, because the literature right now cites that we should use plausible alternatives. So plausible alternatives mean just that, whether it's plausible. It could be anything that could be used to murder someone. So I'm using the example of a knife. Well, it could be a handgun, could be a rope, could be a
candlestick, lead pipe, wrench,
a blunt object. So that follows the definition that so far the literature has taken us at this point. And then just to follow up on my historical timeline, the electrical brain wave component was discovered in 1965, and but that component was discovered in 1965. But since then, 65 and onwards, many other brainwave components have been discovered. The N400, for instance, which occurs basically, that's a negative N for negative deflection that occurs at about 400 milliseconds past the exposure of a specific stimulus. And basically, it's been determined that this N400 basically is when someone determines that there's an incongruent language. So if I say something like, can I have a cup of sugar, or rather 2 sugars to put in my shoe? So sugar is incoherent with putting in a shoe.
Yeah, you don't do that. Yeah,
you put your sugar in a cup of coffee. So, but that's the N400. anyway, I don't want to talk about. So I'm just highlighting the fact that many other there are about 50 or and more even of brainwave component that have been discovered, but the one that the one that is of interest to us and Robin for our work is the P300, which has been determined to be a reliable memory recognition index. And now those are the key words. It is, and I'm just stressing the fact that Robin has mentioned it earlier, but I want to emphasize the fact that it is not lie detection. It is a memory recognition index. So whether someone recognizes a pertinent object, and to answer the question from one of your guests, from one of your viewers earlier about, I think it was Al, who was talking about how could this be admissible? Well, it all goes to the ability of investigators to place themselves in the shoe of the suspect and trying to determine what could the suspect have encoded into his or her memory that we might use, assuming that we had then arrest someone, but something that would have been encoded by into the brain of a suspect that we can use and to see if that person recognizes this detail or not.
Yeah, I imagine it would have to be something that you have some sort of attachment to. I'm one of these people that if you ask me, Lee, what's in your living room right now, what color are the walls, I can't tell you because I'm always like spaced out. I can't find anything. But there's some other people that are completely the opposite. They fixate on, they know every little detail about every little thing. So for people like myself, I'd imagine you need something quite specific, like the rope that was used to tie them or something like that.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
The more again, it's always that at that point it becomes an art more than science. When a crime investigator arrives at a crime scene and has to determine what specific crime detail could I use that only the crime suspect would know, and me as the investigator would know. So, for instance, suppose that I'm seeing your room behind you. Someone could easily commit a murder in your office and not notice the lamp or the painting that's on your wall.
Yeah.
Or then again, that person may. So it's very difficult, and that's a challenge to the technique. A person may have encoded that detail into memory or not. So it becomes really an art form from an investigator's point of view to isolate and identify those crucial aspects that one would think that would have been encoded in someone's memory.
Things that are central to the crime.
I think you use the correct words there, Lee. We call it salience.
Salience.
So,
Yes.
so in other words, the choice, exactly the right term. You cottoned onto it. You have, when you prepare your stimuli. I mean, I'm very interested hearing when Michel talks. I'm trying to pick out all the jargon he uses that we can explain, because we tend to be careful, like salience or stimuli, which is what we all use. So we're going to learn to unpack it for the audience. So the stimuli, of course, is just the pictures and the words you show on the screen, of course. That's the stimuli. But getting back to salience, in artificial examples like looking in the drawer, which I gave you now, you're quite right that you wouldn't necessarily notice all the surrounding circumstances because you had no reason to do so. But if you go to a used car yard to steal a car, you would have cased the joint, you would have made sure you know what time the guard's off duty, you would have known what the signage is, you would have known the alarm system. So you would have knowledge of the surrounding circumstances. And so it'll be a lot easier in a real case scenario to choose the correct stimuli.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that seems to me that there's going to be certain things that are just key that you can't forget about. So anything that the perpetrator of the crime has brought to the scene, anything that, yeah, like I said before, central to the crime. Yeah, so the more of those things that you can, because I guess you want more than one, right? That would be ideal.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
well, I've got you on the knife, I've got you on the rope, and I've got you on the duct tape, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, that's a yellow rope that you used. That was a marine knife that you used, and that was actually black duct tape. You know,
Think of the board game Clue. You know, Professor Colonel Mustard in the living room, with the candlestick. So of course, yes, you for statistical reasons, you would want as the more stimuli than not. If a person is re- reacts cerebrally to one item, it means something. But if that same person has a strong deflection in terms of P300 with 1, 2, or 3 stimuli, well, then the odds are greater that this person is guilty of the crime, because that person remembers, or his or her brain has encoded very many details that only the author of the crime would know. So when you can probably raise a doubt with one stimulus, but 2 and 3 and 4,
yes,
the odds are decreasing that by accident, and you somehow it's a mistake. But the more, of course, the more stimuli you have in your crime scene and details that you can bring up. One study that I conducted, and was a mock at Concordia University here in Montreal. The details of which are not yet published, but that's one thing that I have to do in a near few months. Well, basically, we used three stimuli in that experiment. We had the face of a suspect who was acting as the terrorism cell leader, who would then instruct the guilty party, the participant, to arm a mock explosive device. So the face of the accomplice was a stimuli, one stimulus. The mock explosive device became a second important stimulus, and the third one was the crime scene, where we were asking the participant to place the bomb underneath a certain desk in a laboratory. So we had three stimuli in that. So again, the odds, it's at that point, it all becomes a work of statistical analysis in terms of calculating the odds that this person would recognize.
Yeah, it's pretty convincing. I had a thought when you were using the looking at many images, and you were just using it casually before, and it was a good descriptor. But then my mind went to a police lineup, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So obviously, look, if the witness recognizes the person and goes, "That was him," it's done. But we know that there's times when there's a witness in a police lineup, and they're looking and they're going, "I can't say for sure." Now, does this technology have the capacity to work on something like a memory that slipped, or do you know what I mean? Sometimes you forget someone's name, but you did know it at one point, but you don't remember their name now, or
Well, I can certainly address that, because like in that mock terrorism scenario that I'm talking about, we achieved our best results in terms of percentage of accuracy with the face of the criminal accomplice. So of the three stimuli that we use, the crime scene, the mock explosive device, and the face of this accomplice, we achieved our best results with the face of an accomplice. So it can certainly be used using a facial stimuli, and the brain will react or not. But contrary or to the technique that Robin was describing earlier, the protocol I validated recently does not mix showing an image as well as a statement. I'm using the technique that I'm using is shows displays only a series of images, and that's it.
Okay, so that's interesting. I mean, that could be really crucial. So, Robin, I'm guessing that you're going your way because you think it's superior. So far, Michel, you're the same. Could you make arguments respectively for why your way is better? And I guess I'll go to Robin because we haven't heard from him.
Well, I'm not necessarily. I don't think either of us say one is superior of the other.
Yeah.
Really, we just happen to be investigating different systems. There's a third one called BIOS, which I went to look at in Singapore because they use that system, and the Indian guys who developed that came over for that week as well. So I'm not saying one system is superior to the other. I think they both use the same similar techniques. The interpretation is different and the approach is different. So I think the jury's still out, which is the better system. And in fact, I did suggest to Michel we should have a head-to-head showdown using exactly the same scenarios and testing both systems independently and see which comes out better. And that's still to happen. So I don't think one is superior to the other. It hasn't been proved to be better than the other at this stage. And I said we necessarily have to simplify quite a lot of what I know Michel is trying to contextualize some of the stuff, but it's easy to go down the rabbit hole of technology here and lose your listeners if you get too detailed. But there's a lot more nuance to the testing than what we've described. For example, you mentioned the lineup. Fascinating idea of maybe testing the brain for recognition of witnesses. But remember, some people have better recognition abilities than others. You get the so-called super recognizers who see a face once and will never forget that face for the rest of their lives. And some people who can see somebody today and never forget them tomorrow. So you may be good at name remembering, but terrible at facial recognition. So individual differences play a big role as well.
That was actually sort of what I was getting to with the question. Someone who's seen something and kind of forgotten it, but can you retrieve it from the recesses of their memory, or is that
okay? But I can address that quickly. It's a bit more complicated than that. We're not dealing with memory retrieval. The hippocampus in the brain contains the encoding of memory. In other words, you think you memorize something short term or long term. Everything you've ever done is somewhere in your brain. It may just be in deeper recesses. So it may be through the hippocampus encoded to the parietal lobe or elsewhere, hidden away somewhere. It's there. And for example, if I tell you to name all 50 American states, you probably couldn't do it off the bat. But if I gave you a list of 200 names, you'd pick them out, wouldn't you? You'd be able to pick them all 50 out of a list of, say, 1,000. Because it's in your brain, but you can't remember off the bat. So in the same way, we're not dealing with memory and memory retrieval as such. We're dealing with recognition.
Yes.
And recognition is something which is contextual. It depends on the circumstance of the crime, whether you recognize something or not. Memory retrieval is a very difficult, complex situation, which is a different thing altogether. But your brain will recognize something in context.
It's also like it's a fire you might not want to play with. I mean, our mutual, let's say, supervisor, Dr. Laurence, he's like a world expert in hypnotism, and he's very skeptical about so-called, memory recovery.
Absolutely.
I mean, what I got from him is under hypnotism, it usually does more harm than good.
Yes. Well, in fact, a lot of experts in the UK and others who result in many convictions from so-called childhood abuse and all the rest of it have been shown to be false, have been false memory recovery. And there's a very close correlation between your imaginary or suggested memories and actual memories. So, as you quite rightly point out, very, very dangerous ground to rely on. But just to deal with your previous point about us dealing with our specific methodologies, I think it may be very useful at this stage to emphasize again we are knowledge detectors with different ways of interpreting the brainwaves. To be distinguished from the polygraph, which is the so-called traditional lie detector, and functional MRI, which are the two big other technologies that are used for actual lie detection. And I think why this system is superior is we don't say we're not detecting lies, we're detecting whether you know something in your brain, whereas the polygraph, where you sit in a chair and they're measuring your blood pressure and your sweating and your heart rate, and then saying because you're more anxious now, we now jump to the conclusion you must be lying. And a lot of us become anxious for various reasons. Now, in many cases, pretty accurate, but in many cases, people give wrong readings because of individual differences in anxiety, for example. So the point I want to emphasize is that this technology, whether you use BIOS or Rosenfeld system or firewall system, relies on two things: that the final conclusion is going to be likely be much more accurate than that final conclusion of the polygraph and the functional MRI, which I'll explain in a second, just to put context to that. The functional MRI use not brain waves, but brain scanning with an MRI, and they now have developed a mobile one, which costs about $50,000. So you don't have to go to a hospital to have your brain scanned. And functional means it for specific purposes. And what they say, and there is the two commercial operations in the United States applying this, is that if I ask you your name, what's your name?
Lee
I'm
Meller.
using you as a subject again, Lee. Just give me your name.
Lee Meller.
Okay. I want you to make up a false name now. Just give me your name, Lee.
Clint Sleen.
Okay. Now, what happens there is that if you give your name, which is the truth, it's a lot quicker. There's a lot less brain work happening to give that name. It's very quick. When I'm asking you to give a false name, there's a slight, you can't even measure it, but the prefrontal cortex, where your cognitive development, the cognitive processing takes place, has to first process, okay, he wants me to give my name, I'm going to lie about this. Let me think about the impact of this lie. If I tell him that, then this is my brother-in-law's name, he'll get into trouble. If I tell him that, so I'll give him this name. That brain work results in an increase in oxygenated blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. And therefore, we can, by brain scanning, we can see an increased blood flow when certain questions are asked, which shouldn't be there. Because why are you doing all this stuff? And therefore, the inference is then drawn, you must be lying on that point because there's too much brain work involved in coming up with an answer. But again, the final conclusion using the brain scanning method, functional MRI, is not that reliable because if you know how to beat the system, if you ask me what is my name and I start thinking of complicated mathematical formulae, it'll have the same kind of brain work and therefore give a false positive. Which when it comes to the brain wave testing, which is 300ths of a second after stimulant, much more difficult to beat. So that's the advantage of this particular technology over functional MRI and polygraphs, is your final conclusion is a lot more reliable than in those two technologies, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting sold on it. What I think you're going to have to do is you're going to have to try on, eventually, and I know this is a long path, but on a lot of neurodiverse subjects. So just, somebody with autism or schizophrenia or psychopath.
You're preempting exactly what we're already doing. It's a good point.
Oh,
our last set of experiments, we did 38 students, all undergraduates, used to concentrating for 3 hours, and the results were wonderful there because they sat down, concentrated 3 hours, did the test, complied with instructions, and we can go into that in a bit more detail, maybe in a second or two. And the results were very good. Then we went to some of the most serious criminals in New Zealand, people with 20-year history of crime, very serious crimes in both murders and robberies and sexual offences. And the results weren't nearly as good as it was with these students. Exactly the same protocols, exactly the same approach. And there were very many reasons for that, but two of the big reasons were incipient or historical brain damage, which affects that, which may explain the criminality as well, which is an interesting thing, and also the inability to concentrate for long periods of time. And as Michel will tell you, concentration is key. And he's got an interesting anecdote which he told me about where he was getting bad results and then he changed one of his protocols and suddenly the concentration improved and that improved his results.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because what you just described, those are the things that are most present in antisocial offenders.
Well, this is in fact so.
Yeah,
sociopaths and psychopaths, in fact.
So you're going to catch all like you're going to catch all the good, the not so bad guys. And
it's more difficult to get. It's not impossible. It's more difficult to be much more careful with your protocols in dealing with long-term criminals. They have no incentive to cooperate.
Yes.
There's still I should add that we're still a long way from delivering something on a silver platter to police authorities. There's still a lot of work to be done in laboratory and afterwards conducting field studies, because the participants that have been used that I've used anyway in my research and the participants that were used in Dr. Rosenfeld's laboratory in Chicago were all university students, presumably healthy, young. So they're still
disciplined, certain IQ.
Yeah, exactly. So well educated. So we have not read any studies so far dealing with people with any mental disorders, people that were under the influence of alcohol while committing their crimes. So I'm sure I could speculate on what I would find in an offender that commits a crime while seriously intoxicated by drug or alcohol. I would think that his or her memory would be severely affected, which would have I presume, an impact on the ability of certainly Dr. Rosenfeld's protocol to detect any memory trace of memory recognition. I'd like to add to something I said as far as which protocol is best. I certainly agree with Robin. The jury is still out between Dr. Farwell's protocol and Dr. Rosenfeld's protocol, and I know very little about what the Indian scientists are doing with BIOS. However, compared with the polygraph and fMRI, I think that one crucial element that's should be considered anyway by law enforcement is the small nature or the small size of equipment that's required to conduct these tests. I mean, you can just imagine. I don't think any police force would have the budget to equip their police station with an MRI scan. So those they cost the cost of such equipping a room to house an MRI is exorbitant. So frankly, I don't see that being used in the near future. And the polygraph, I should point out that the polygraph, it's not the polygraph per se that's controversial. It's the test used with the polygraph that's controversial, because the same test that I described, that both the techniques that Robin and I are using, is based on the concealed information test, which I described earlier. Well, the same concealed information test can be applied with using the polygraph, and the polygraph is only the machine that collects multiple physiological signals.
Yeah.
And I for one, did a small experiment while doing my PhD using a polygraph, but I was only measuring the electrodermal activity, and that was to date the electrodermal activity, and when it's used to in the context of a concealed information test, according to the literature, it still provides somewhat reliable conclusions. One of your viewers has mentioned, raised the question about whether you're using a regular alias. Well, in the peer-reviewed article that's in press right now, and the experiment that I did to validate Dr. Rosenfeld's method, we used autobiographical data. So basically, we put our participants through a mock crime situation, and basically we instructed our participants, our guilty participants, that they were subject to a police investigation. There had been a break-in at the computer lab at the university, and that they were being investigated. Their name came up through the police investigation. So for our for our innocent subjects, we basically assorted. We presented them with names that were not that them. So basically, before we tested them, we showed them a list of typical North American names, and we asked them whether these names had any significance to them, and if they said no, fine. So we showed them to our innocent participants. We showed them a full array of different names, not their own. In our guilty group, we showed them their own name mixed with, again, other typical North American names, and we achieved very excellent results. But to come to the alias question, I raised that point in the article that's in press right now. It's a matter of, again, I come back to the basic that I explained at the beginning. If the stimulus is novel and meaningful, and if it's in the form of an alias, then technically speaking, although we have not tested it in laboratory, but technically speaking, that person should manifest a strong P300 amplitude if the person is using an alias that's often, and that becomes well encoded into memory. Then technically that alias should produce similar results as if we were showing the person's own last name.
Leah asked, could you use the EEG with the fMRI to help validate and or refine interpretations?
I think there could be.
I'll let Robin answer that, but I'd like to add to, when Robin is finished, I'll add on something afterwards.
Sure.
I think one has to be very careful with that, because, as I said, the EEG does not measure deception; it measures knowledge. So if you suspect deception because of the earlier allegations of innocence or non-involvement, and the brain shows involvement, one could then follow it up with a polygraph or with the fMRI. But the danger with that, of course, is that, as I said, the final conclusion of those two technologies, if you know what you're doing, as Russian spies in the US have done for many years, you can beat them. For example, on the polygraph, on the standardizing questions, you could think of all kinds of anxiety-filled thoughts which create a false positive, and the same with the fMRI, if you know how the system works. So you could then end up with those two exonerating you, whereas the brain shows you have knowledge of something, and so there is that danger. But theoretically, of course, it can be done, but it's a bit like having three watches. You're never sure what the correct time is. So that's my take on that.
If I may add to Robin's comment, basically, it would be, from what I know of using MRI scans, it would be really dangerous to have any metal objects while you're being scanned. And of course, electrodes are made up of or silver chloride metal. So frankly, I don't see how you could have an individual equipped with electrodes attached to their scalp while that person is being scanned into an MRI. However,
sorry, I don't think she's suggesting you do it at the same time. I think she's suggesting
okay.
following it up later to confirm it, not at the same time.
Yeah,
okay,
that's what I thought.
But I'll just follow up with something that has been in my thinking with using a different technology. Electrooculogram could possibly be used in the same time as an electrical an EEG. I conducted a really short experiment while undergoing my PhD again at Concordia, where I did not use both, but I used an electrooculogram, which measures it measures various movements of the eye as a person is being exposed to a variety of stimuli. So what I did in my experiment, I basically I exposed my participants to the same mock terrorism scenario that I'd used with my EEG, but I used it with an EOG, an electrooculogram. So the persons were seated in front of a computer screen, and then you'd have this electrooculogram measuring the movement of their eyes and all other kinds of data. My data was not conclusive, but because I'm pretty sure my sample size was way too small because it was just a course project. But I think there's great potential to using electrooculogram. Now the joining both at the same time would require, I think, a lot of programming to make sure that that both instrument, the electroencephalogram and the electrooculogram, are speaking the same language and are measuring or begin measuring either the brain or the eyes at the same time. But I don't think it's impossible. And as a matter of fact, I know that some scientists in the UK have achieved this this method of analyzing all kinds of data, but I don't think they're using it in a forensic setting. But I think there's quite great potential in using both an electrooculogram and an electroencephalogram.
So, from what I've just heard from you guys, obviously the kind of blackout drunk crime is going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think because I don't know if you guys have all been there. I've been blackout drunk, and yeah, you really do black out. So there's got to be some prudence, perhaps. This is not always going to be the silver bullet, because in some cases you don't want to use it, and so then you have to determine, I guess, well, what are those cases? And if you've just got like a crime scene to go with, arguably, some behavioral analysis might be useful there. You might look at this and it's like, I don't know, this person is kind of what we see when someone's really drunk. something like that, right? But because you don't want to use it on someone and then they don't hit any of the memories, and then you go, okay, it can't be them.
Well,
No, but
the techniques that Robin and I are have employed and are researching should not be thought as a silver bullet. I mean, I'm a retired police officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police with 30 plus years of service, and I've investigated all kinds of crime. So, I mean, you have to employ the techniques in your toolbox that are available and that are applicable. I mean, I've attended so many crime scenes where the crime scene analyst would come over and dust for fingerprints, and we would not find any fingerprints. That's just the way it is. So in some cases there are fingerprints, in some other cases there aren't, and sometimes there are, but they're so difficult to read. They're smudged,
No,
and
partial.
yeah, exactly. And the same goes for DNA. I mean, not every crime leaves such a trace that DNA could be drawn from. I'd like to raise a point here that according to UK and US American statistics, police investigators, with the exception of homicides and sexual assaults, police investigators generally find physical evidence in about 15% of crime scenes. So think about it. With the exception of homicides and sexual assaults, physical evidence is found in only 15%. So it's not because the police crime scene analysts are incompetent. My take is that simply there are no physical evidence left. And where I think the technique that Robin and I are working on, where I think that it's where the potential lies is in the evidence that's stored in the memory of either a witness of a crime or an offender of a crime. So that's the where I think that where we could tap evidence in the form of memory recognition.
I also just thought of a counter to my own point. The more blackout drunk you are, the more disorganized you're going to be. So therefore, you're probably going to leave more physical evidence because you're in that state. So it's this is great for people who plan methodically. It's right. Whereas the blackout drunk guy, you get him anyways because he's sloppy. So
just
perhaps
the point on your blackout drunk scenario. I mean, you had to do something before you got blackout drunk, and you have to do something afterwards. So if you have a very well-trained investigator, they can develop a set of stimuli which covers the actions before and the actions afterwards. And the jury's still out to what extent, how drunk you must be not to recognize things. The evidence we have so far is that you can be pretty drunk and still recognize what's going on around you. But that needs further work, as you have pointed out. I think the point I want to make that you raised is there are three factors in this technology. It's got to be a suitable ex post facto application. It can't be used to predict crime at this stage, at least. Secondly, sometimes you get a subject who's just untestable. We've had two people in both our sets of experiments, because the experiments we did are based on actual real life scenarios, both for the students and for the criminals. We went to their files and picked out incidents from their past. So we could verify what we call the ground truth that in fact happened. And we had one subject who just was untestable. We couldn't get results out of him. And then we thought it may be due to long-term drug use, and we investigated that. He was a very heavy cannabis smoker for many years. But we had one student who had the same results. So apart from the scenario, there are one or two people, very, very seldom, out of everybody we tested, there were two, and this is over 4 years, who were virtually untestable because the results just were so scrambled that you couldn't get any reading at all. That doesn't mean they're innocent or guilty. All it means is that the system can't help determine that guilt or innocence. That's all. I just want to say on the experiments we did, it was not simulated studies. We got incidents from the students' past which was salient, driving while drunk and crashing into a tree and all kinds of things. And with the criminals we tested, we took it from their files. So we got very close to real life results. And we are pretty confident that based on those results that the brainwave technology is at a point where it can be used forensically.
Yeah, I'm now I'm very, very curious about this. I have a lot more faith now, Michel, than I did in
But you know what?
Yeah.
Strangely enough and ironically enough, I think that the biggest challenge comes from the least likely people. From my experience in policing, I think the biggest challenge that Robin, and I'm not sure what kind of I'll let Robin address this issue, but anyway, from my perspective, I think that convincing the police community is our biggest challenge, simply because of culture and speaking specifically with North American police agencies, where the where the go-to um, where the go-to technique of testing credibility or veracity is the polygraph and the control quality technique, the CQT, which is the really controversial technique, the CQT, where one is trying to pose a question that's going to raise the stress, and it's all about stress based technique. Where I think that's the challenge, is to convince police agencies to accept this memory recognition and to use it in their toolbox.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, most police departments aren't even using the MVAC. Do you guys know what the MVAC is?
I have to admit my ignorance. No, I don't.
Okay, so we're talking about like the machine gun of DNA collection. It was invented by Dr. Bradley, and it was originally, he was using it to collect bacteria from surfaces for food, and then they found out they was doing so well at collecting bacteria that he was saying, no, you still got bacteria in your meat, and they're going like, there was always going to be bacteria, like it says. So as a kitchen, a restaurant kitchen bacteria detection tool, it was useless because it was too good. But then he turned it, you know what I mean? He's always going to get some bacteria. But when he turned it on to collecting DNA, so what they can do now is, when you have like let's say you have a T-shirt, what they traditionally do is they swab part of the T-shirt that they think, okay, the collar's torn, so we must have grabbed that. And what the MVAC does, though, is rather than doing targeted areas, it sprays the entire thing, and then it sucks it back up, and it collects like so much more minute DNA. Like we're about to start this cold case TV show, and we talk about that later if you want. But that's our silver bullet, is we're going at everything with the MVAC. That's where all my confidence is, and still trying to convince them, hey, just invest in one of these.
It's a good point you make about the MVAC. Is, as you say, I've got no doubt it will be accepted pretty soon. I mean, because scientifically, you can't really challenge it. It's just a method of sample collection which is much more comprehensive than the hit and miss method that's been used up to now.
Yes.
And it'll be a matter of time before the Innocence Project start exonerating a lot of people based on that. It can even, as I understand what I've read about it, detect samples that are 20 or 30 years old.
Yeah.
By scanning it and pulling it out, and stuff that the police have been sitting on in their sample rooms or in their evidence rooms for ages can be scanned and should be scanned for stuff which they said they couldn't detect any DNA, and quite often you can get it out of that. So on that point, I agree. It's another, but when it comes to any new technology, there are three levels of credibility, or credulousness rather. The first level is that people dismiss it out of hand and are not interested in even engaging with it because they either have willful blindness or they have a vested political interest in it not working. And I think to some extent the polygraph lobby is exceptionally strong in the United States, and they don't want a threat to their power when it comes to their gatekeeping over security agencies and the police, etc. Polygraph is not nearly as strong in other countries. That's why in New Zealand we don't have that pushback. The second issue is that even people who are superficially interested and have read a bit about it sometimes jump to the wrong conclusions, or they oversimplify their conclusions because they haven't gone in the depth required. I'll give you an anecdote on this. When I was first looking for experts to work with me on this technology in New Zealand, I realized I needed cognitive psychologists, I needed scientists, I needed brain experts on brain functioning. And eventually, about 7 or 8 experts I identified that I needed. And then I found one guy in New Zealand, a guy called Professor Richard Jones of the New Zealand Brain Research Institute, who also happens to be a adjunct professor in the Faculty of Medicine, a adjunct professor in electrical engineering. So he was all 7 in 1. So I thought, this is going to save me a lot of time and effort if I've got this guy who's a adjunct professor in 7 faculties and with the New Zealand Brain Research Institute to come on board. And when I first spoke to him, the same skepticism. It sounds a bit like snake oil stuff, this. I mean, what is this all about, But having investigated, he's been part of our team for 4 years now, and he is, as an expert scientist, convinced that it is valid. Great. Of course, nuances need to be worked out. For example, stuff that you mentioned about what about pre-existing brain conditions? What about people who are autistic and or have other issues? What about psychopaths? Brain functioning and brain structure, does that affect the results? So all those things are extra research that has to be done, but to get experts on board, you have to go through the same process of dissolving a skepticism to say this is something worth looking into. And we have got past that process, and I think we're now at the stage where people who have got open minds and no political motive to dismiss it out of hand, like yourself, are engaging with it. And I think that's the important stage we've now reached. And remember, this has been going for 30 years. I mean, the application of this technology has been since 1989, and has been in court cases, but still the general acceptance, as will happen with MBAC, is still a bit of a way off.
If I may add a comment about what you guys were talking about with the MVAC, I'll play the devil's advocate for a minute. It's all fine and dandy to collect all this DNA evidence when you're dealing with a crime against a person most often, but it is of little value. I would say no value in the case where in situations where you are investigating organized crime. I was part of an organized crime task force with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. While I was stationed in Montreal, we were investigating the Italian mafia, and no amount of DNA would have helped us would have helped us prove the crime of conspiracy to commit whatever, because in that case it was all wiretapped evidence that enabled us to make the connections between individuals that made up this criminal organization, and which I think would be where I think this memory detection technique that Robin and I are researching would be useful. It could be applied. In a case, I suspect, where you're investigating members of an organized crime syndicate, and if the three of us are part of a conspiracy, and I'm being shown the name of Lee Meller, and Robin Palmer, and I react to this, well, then it means something. Now, why would I know Lee Miller and Robin Palmer? So if of course added to additional evidence, it could be one piece of the puzzle that would help a prosecutor charge all three of us in terms of
But, but,
being part of a conspiracy.
I don't think it's suggested that MVAC can be used in all circumstances. I mean, but it's going to be crucial for cold cases and for
Mm.
and in particular in cases where people are facing death penalties and things like that, and to exonerate people. So I think it's got incredible value in its
Just,
place. I mean, it's
just,
clearly
just to
not that.
just to backtrack, the only reason I brought it up was to say there's this awesome technology that the police still aren't using. That's the only reason I brought up the
Okay.
Well,
MVAC.
it's a very good example. In fact, Michel's exact example is use an example where it cannot be used, which is quite true. Just like brain fingerprinting can't be used in all contexts either.
Yeah.
You choose your case
It's a
where
toolbox.
it's applicable.
So we're just
And I
getting
think,
better tools, right?
yeah, I mean,
MVAC is like a
Jim,
hammer. This
well, yeah,
brainwave is
exactly.
a screwdriver, whatever.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I'm just thinking. I mean, the use of genealogical websites for DNA, where family members
Yeah.
get hits, and the privacy concerns. That's also another great tool, which, in my view, should be used much more widely. But there are a lot of privacy concerns coming in on that now. So MVAC and the genealogy website, which a lot of historical crimes have been solved through that as well, are tools which should be in the armory of the police. And I think the point we're making is that luckily in New Zealand, most of the people who work are pretty open-minded about this. We've been working with very senior police officers, the head of the police force in the South Island, New Zealand. They're very open-minded about investigating and looking into this. They don't dismiss it out of hand, but there are a couple who have got the knee-jerk reaction, oh, this is all snake oil stuff. We do things the traditional way and not prepared to engage with it. And I think part of your show and this kind of debate does at least expose people to different ways of thinking about it and to understand the nuances of its application.
When I spoke to Michel first about doing this, I said, hey, at the end of it, you'll have a video where, in the simplest terms, because I'll make sure that we've described them simply,
Yes.
you will now have a video at the end of this, which you can send to people and they can just watch it of their own accord, so that's sort of one of the purposes of this talk. The other, I think, was I was still sitting on the fence, but you guys did convince me. Like I'm.
Well, again, we're not even convinced ourselves fully, but in the sense that it's foolproof in all circumstances. All we are saying is that after working on it for 10 years and getting some of the top one of the top, two or three of the top scientists in New Zealand working with me on it, it definitely has scientific validity, which can be applied in forensic settings and should be.
Yes, absolutely. I fully support your efforts, Lee, and I frankly I'm grateful for the public service that you're allowing us to do here, because we need a platform to spread the benefits and the great potential of this technique. And one other avenue, I think this technique would be really helpful, and without having to go through the constitutional maze of rights and legal rights, depending which country you're applying this technique. Because applying and a challenge would be using this technique with a criminal suspect. Of course, a criminal defense lawyer would probably raise all kinds of constitutional arguments to try to convince his or her client not to be exposed to this technique. However, where I think this technique could make a lot of headway is in terms of the innocence projects and eyewitnesses. Of course, the legal challenges of police would be I think somewhat greatly reduced in trying to expose this technique to a crime eyewitness, because there's no criminal accusations levied against an eyewitness. But when you think of all the cases that are collected by the Innocence Projects around the world, most often, and I forget the statistics offhand, but a great majority of false convictions or wrongful convictions are caused by an eyewitness making a mistake. Where I think this technique would be helpful is because it provides a quantitative measure of reliability. So I'll speak for Canada anyway. Police forces in Canada regularly use a very rudimentary questionnaire to when they expose their eyewitness to a photo lineup or a photo parade of a suspect. Basically, they're asking whether it's in the form of a document that the eyewitness has to complete, but basically they're asking if to the witness, they're asking him or her, how certain are you, how sure are you, or how convinced are you that you've picked the right suspect. Well, that becomes a self-assessment. There's no way, there's no independent way for a person to say, well, I'm saying that I'm 90% or 85% or 100% certain that I've picked the right person. Well, that's a self-assessment, whereas the technique that Robin and I are looking into provides a mathematical number of reliability. We can say, at least the technique that I'm using from Dr. Rosenfeld, I can say with after conducting my statistical analysis, I can say that subject X is 93%, 95% accurate in having picked the right person. So I can provide that precise measure of reliability to an investigating agency.
I think you run into a difficulty with something like wrongful convictions here. So let's say, because then the memories have been arguably contaminated, right? So I've had Robert Baltovich on the show. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that case, Michel. He was convicted of murdering his girlfriend Elizabeth Bain. He was wrongfully convicted. He was free. He told the story on this show, and there was a number of eyewitnesses that said that they had seen him at different places at different times. Now the issue comes if, like, let's say you come along later. Okay, did you really see him? But now you have seen him, right?
Yeah.
You've seen him in court. Now you do have this recognition of him that I don't think you can take back and contextualize. So I think, like any
it's a challenge. It's a limitation. Of course, it's a limitation.
So I mean, where I'm going with this is, it's like any great scientific breakthrough, right? You're gonna have to be so careful about how you design the use of every case that you apply this to. You're gonna have to really think it through, and you got to start thinking about mental contamination.
I think the point you make, the three important points that arise from what you've just said. I mean, there are three levels of this. First is to confirm the reliability and accuracy of the science. Once I think we've virtually at that stage already now, independently verification. You've got to then persuade investigators and the police forces to try it out on suspects and informers and in real life settings. And once you've got that, you should try and get admitted in court. It's quite a process. But the danger that you allude to is particularly so when you come to jury trials, because juries tend to be impressed by science.
Mm-hmm.
And if the science says, yes, he recognizes that face, it may have been due to corrupt police practices that the face was recognized, and therefore he gets wrongfully convicted because of the new science, not in spite of it.
Right.
So it's a very big danger. One has to have all those safeguards built in. Now, we could have an entire podcast on just the safeguards and the dangers that we've identified.
Yeah.
We're just looking at the science. So in this discussion, I'll give you one example. One policeman asked me, well, surely if somebody doesn't want to cooperate, I can get a search warrant to search his brain. So I said, well, technically speaking, I suppose you could, but there could be all kinds of rights issues there. But if the law allows you to get a search warrant to search his brain, you're still going to get him to cooperate when you're sitting in the chair. So there are all kinds of complications that arise from that. And I think those are 3 steps that we have to follow. And I think an example which is very important here is the history of DNA acceptance as in the investigations and in the courts. In the UK, there's a fascinating study. If you read the history of Alec Jeffrey's work there, he's the father of the use of forensic DNA in the UK.
Colin Pitchfork case.
That's right. So you know about Colin Pitchfork.
Well, he's up for parole soon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know how Colin Pitchfork was caught. But perhaps for your viewers, we can summarize that.
He was the first guy caught using DNA.
Yeah, but it was pure by luck, because the Pitchfork case, in fact, illustrates how dangerous it can be in this application. Because what happened was Jeffries was so confident that the DNA of each person was unique and it could be used forensically, that he went to the police when there was this murder in this little village, a very contained village. So the idea was it clearly had to be one of the 300 or 400 people in the village who committed it. And he went to them and said, look, let's test every one of the male members who fit the profile in this village. And I'm pretty sure you are going to find your murderer through my DNA system. And the skeptical police were eventually persuaded to say, okay, we'll try it. And they then tested every male member in that village, and lo and behold, they didn't find him. Okay, and he was devastated. The police were vindicated, and a lot of the old guard were gloating about this. And he was going back to the drawing board because he couldn't understand, because on his scenario, it should have worked. They should have caught him. And when he was about to give up, somebody came to him and said, look, my conscience has been bothering me. This Pitchfork guy persuaded me to give my DNA in his place. And I feel very guilty about this because what's he going to hide? Why is he doing this? So they went to test Pitchfork, Colin Pitchfork, which is an unfortunate surname, which is another interesting area of investigation. And there he was. And he was vindicated, and that was the start of the use of DNA in the UK, as you know. But it's pure piece of luck, because if that guy hadn't come forward and said that he was falsely given him DNA on behalf of him, it would have set the whole thing back by another 10 years in the UK.
Actually, the way that I remember it is slightly different. Is that guy was in the pub with a bunch of people, and he just kind of brought it up. Like, I went for Colin, and they're like, what? Why? And I think either they encouraged him to come forward, or they came forward. That was
whatever the motivation was. That's whatever. I may have the facts slightly wrong, but the point is, he was identified as somebody who gave on behalf of Pitchfork.
Yeah, and so.
And another interesting point on that you made, which talk about Pitchfork, which is sounds like pitchfork, is the use is the influence of surnames, and this is digressing slightly, but it's a danger in itself. The influence of surnames on juries and on fact finding. Pitchfork is a very unfortunate name to have if you're facing trial for murder, as is a case like Slaughter. We had a case of Slaughter where one of the people we tested was Slaughter. He was Quirrell Slaughter in Alabama, I think it was. His DNA was shown to be that he wasn't at the scene. Witnesses showed he was at the scene, but he was still executed. And I said, I think he had the wrong surname. If he was Armstrong, after Lance Armstrong, perhaps not so much anymore. But the surname can have a big impact on jury decision making. Okay, so I think that's something to look at in the future. Does your surname condemn you to a life of crime? Anyway, that's another interesting issue.
I mean, yeah, we can digress a bit now. I think we've made our main points, right? So let's just have some fun. There was a study done that showed that applicants for jobs were not racially discriminated against unless the name was like a stereotypically black name.
Right.
So if you had a black applicant whose name was, say, John Walker, everyone, okay, no discrimination. But if Keyshawn Washington applies, he gets discriminated against.
Exactly. And I've seen that study.
Yeah, that one fascinated me.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so you got to wonder, does that also affect the jury?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure it does. I mean, in this case, Slaughter's case is a classic example of that, in my view, because he was exonerated on so many fronts and they still convicted him. I'm not saying just because of the surname, but I think that could have been a subconscious factor which validated the decision making. Well, maybe his ancestors did something. Why has he got the surname Slaughter? It's interesting how these things work. I think it may also be interesting at this stage to deal with the Harrington. Are you familiar with the Harrington case, Lee?
No.
In the US, it's a case study which is the very first time this technology was actually used in court, and where Falwell was called as an expert witness to give evidence in court. And I think it illustrates a couple of issues around the technology which I think are important. Now, Harrington is a black man who was, or African American in American terms, who was arrested for murder. And the murder was the murder of a retired police officer who was working as a security guard at a car dealership. And a car theft gang came in to steal cars, and in the course of that attempt, he was murdered. And of course, there's an enormous amount of pressure on the police in that area to find the culprits for political and for many other reasons, re-election reasons. Unlike New Zealand police, in some districts are still elected. And they then found a youngster, very much like the Making of a Murderer series, 16-year-old, who they knew was involved as a watch or a lookout for car thieves, and said, well, who did this? And he says he's got no idea. And he said, well, if you don't tell us, you're going to jail for 20 years. And then he said, oh, it was X. He gave a name. And they went after X. And of course, then they found that X was already in jail and couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Then they went back to him and said, give us another name. And then they gave him Harrington's name, who was known to be part of a car thieving gang, but had nothing to do with it. In fact, he was at a ball game at the same time. Yeah. And then they arrested Harrington, and Harrington was convicted on very, very spurious evidence and sentenced to life imprisonment. And he tried every avenue of appeal and failed every level. And then he heard about this work on the brain fingerprinting stuff and got Falwell involved. His lawyer got him involved. Falwell agreed to test him. He tested him on the actual offense, the car thieving and the murder, the theft of the car, and he tested him on his alibi because he got all the people at the ball game at the same time. And on the car theft, he came out completely, could not have been there. And on the alibi, came out completely, he was there.
Right. So, okay. So you get that's great. You get two.
Exactly. Exactly.
Solidifies the alibi and debunks the crime.
So in the district court in Iowa, he was called as an expert. 5 hours of cross-examination. This evidence was admitted, and the courts heard the evidence and said, "Okay, all very so, but it's not scientifically validated yet, and therefore the people's case still stands." And the conviction was confirmed. And then it went to, well, he was convicted. Then it went on appeal to the Iowa Supreme Court. And then the same submissions were made and all the papers were filed. And as part of this situation, the witness then came to the investigators, the witness who implicated Harrington, and said, look, I was forced to do this. I offered this name, and they said he's already in jail, and then I offered Harrington, and he retracted his statement. So together with that and this evidence went on appeal, and then the courts set Harrington free after 22 years on the basis that his constitutional rights were violated. 22 years later, they didn't accept or didn't, in the judgment, consider the brain fingerprinting evidence, but they read it and they could see the results, but they didn't give any credence to it because they didn't want to just be the first to validate a science which has not been accepted worldwide.
Maybe officially they didn't give it credence.
Yeah,
but...
yeah, I know, quite right. But now the interesting part to that was, one would think that the prosecution would then say, fine, we've been caught out, we now give up on this. They took it on appeal and wanted to go to the US Supreme Court with this, or one of the federal courts, I'm not sure which it was. And they got the lawyers in, and part of their argument was that nobody in the United States, and this you can read the case records, black and white, nobody in the United States has the right not to be framed. This was a proposed argument. And the lawyers then said, I'm not going to any court with that kind of argument. And then they caved in, and he got $12 million as a payout, 12.5 million. And his co-accused also got a payout based on that. But the point is that this man would have been still in jail, but for the efforts to try and show that this is a complete stitch-up. But that is the only case to date where this evidence has been accepted by a court and considered by a court in the United States or worldwide for that matter. So we are trying to get to the point where we have another test case, but to get to that point, we need to validate the stuff very accurately so we are sure that it is accepted as genuine scientific evidence and not seen as snake oil stuff.
It would be terrific to, because we're still seeing which is the better of the two approaches, right? Is it yours or is it Michel's? Which one? So it'd be great to bring them both into a situation, you know, run the same scenario. I guess you could run the same scenario and then do it on two different machines. Could you do that? Or would it cost?
Certainly, we could work something out, even at a distance. As long as we agree on the scenario and the type of stimuli used, Robin could easily conduct his study in New Zealand, and me conducting it somewhere else, and then we would arrive at whatever the results would.
Well, I was thinking you use the same subject.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to have so.
I think so. Right. I think the best scenario would be to have exactly the same subjects in exactly the same venue, where they tested in the morning of Monday, and Tuesday morning they do exactly the same test with the different tests, same subject, same surrounding variables. That would probably be the ideal.
There might be some methodological issues, Robin.
No, but we can agree on that. But the point is that I'm not invested in any. I'm not a cheerleader for any one. I'm trying to see which works best, and it may be that a hybrid system has to be developed, which is even better than the two individually. We don't know, but I think you're quite right that I were a defense lawyer, and I've been a defense lawyer in many 20 years of criminal trials. The first thing I would do is say, well, you know, you're saying your system works. What about that Rosenfeld system? His results are different. We tested it on that, and now so I'll just raise the doubt by comparing two systems. So it's important that that comparison be done in order to finalize it.
On the subject of not necessarily which technique is better, but compared to fMRI or the polygraph or any kind of other instruments, there's one point that I forgot to mention earlier, that where I think this technique, I mentioned that this technique was relatively cheap compared to having to buy a MRI, but also on the issue of training. Um, Maybe people out there are probably wondering, well, it's not, it sounds complicated, all this brain stuff and having to understand all this and brainwave and synaptic activity. Well, if I can probably lower these concerns a little bit by saying that during the course of my PhD, I had 5 research assistants assisting me to conduct the various experiments that I conducted, and they were undergraduate students, and they had no prior knowledge of what the concealed information test was all about, and they, of course, they had a good background of psychology, but still, I think that I was able to train them in about roughly a week, and how to place electrodes on someone's scalp, and having and understanding how to interpret the software. So if I maybe add another week to train a police officer that has no psychology background, I think I can easily train a police officer in a matter of a couple of weeks to operate this technique. So it's does not require a PhD to
Yeah.
Well, I disagree slightly there, if I may, Lee. And my disagreement is on 2 fronts. First of all, in dealing on real case scenarios in the 2 sessions we did, we find a lot of artifacts mean things that went wrong, technical issues, which is not something you can train very quickly, and especially the training in creating the probes and the stimuli questions correctly is quite a long process. But the point I want to make, I agree it can be done. We train students, postgraduate students, to do it as well. But in my view, it is not a good idea for the police to be the people doing the testing, because it needs to be an independent unit which has no interest in the police or in control of the police, because if the police are going to be doing this testing, its credibility is already shot, because we know that for career advancement and everything else, they would want a certain outcome, either consciously or subconsciously. It should not be the police. It should be an independent unit of trained people who have experts they can refer to for glitches or strange results. So one of the recommendations we are making, and we made in our report to our funders, is whatever happens here is it must not be the police who do the testing.
Yeah, I actually think that the training part and the understanding it part, I don't think that would be that much of an issue as far as hooking up the electrodes and such, and but I think where the real devil is, it's in the design of the images and the context you put them in, and avoiding this sort of, like, I called it like mental cross contamination, because you got to really think through that stuff.
Well, I'll give you an example on that, Lee. I'll give you a very funny example on that. When we were doing the testing in New Zealand, we're using name lists from the United States. Now, if you're doing your target and your probe and your irrelevance, they've got to be of similar number of syllables, so the brain doesn't do extra work for others and then create a false. And they've got to be a similar result. So if you have a name which is both possibly male or female, like Sam, you've got to then choose other names like Kim and whatever, which could be male or female, as your alternatives for targets and for relevance. And we chose Elliot for one of them. Now, in the United States, Elliot could be a female name. In New Zealand, it's exclusively male. You don't get female Elliots here. So that created a slight change in response. And then we realized there's some of these names are culturally specific to different countries. So you've got to be very careful. That's a tiny example, but that's an example how careful you must be in your choice, because that can result in artifacts, meaning unexpected brain results, which are due to ignorance. So you are quite right in your preparation of your stimuli. That means the questions you're going to ask, the images you're going to choose. you got to make sure they are consistent, accurate, and salient.
Sure.
Yeah, and
My pushback to that would be that certainly in Canada it is the case that where police officers prepare photo parade or photo lineup or whatever the term is down under. But so police officers prepare the photo parade, photo lineup. So it's not the distinction, however, is that it is prepared by the investigator, and I was in that role a number of times, but it was administered by another police officer who had no involvement in the investigation. So I would, as the investigator, I would prepare the stimuli, the setup, but I would hand it over to a colleague who had no connection to the investigation, and he would show the photo lineup, photo parade to the eyewitness. So I would see that kind of.
But the danger of that, Michel, is that it's a bit like saying the police have their own DNA lab and the police test their own DNA to decide what the results are. You've got to have an independence because the consequences are just so great that if you're not seen to be independent.
In Canada, anyway, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police owns and operates their own police laboratory. So I guess it may be a question of where the credibility of it might lies on the police force. There are some police forces that have more credibility than others, I suppose.
Possibly. I just think it helps if you're going to rely on a conviction for somebody, especially countries that still have the death penalty, because this is widely used, and there is any suggestion of undue influence or lack of independence, that for me is problematic. I think that's Canada may be the exception.
You could carry this argument further by saying, who will interview the prime suspect? It should not be interviewed by the police because they're corrupt.
No, that's a false analogy. That's a complete false analogy. We're talking about expert evidence here. And we call expert evidence, which you're going to say it's expert scientific evidence. That's not interrogation. That is on the level of analysis of DNA or analysis of false confessions, where you get experts who know what they're doing to make those decisions. I don't think you get the police to do that. I mean, you got bias because you're an ex-policeman, so you and an ex-Canadian policeman who obviously didn't have any corrupt practices. But I would suggest to you that's not the case all over the world.
Well, of course not.
I'm really interested in linkage analysis, so I've looked at a lot of like VICAP forms, right? The police receive VICLAS in Canada, VICAP in or HITS in the US.
Okay.
And even though the police have received training in this, I look at it and they're partially complete, or the policeman has marked it wrong, and I'm just like, no, that's not overkill. That's. So if they can't get the VICLAS or VICAP forms right, I'm skeptical about designing something at this level. I think you want someone that only does this.
Again, I push back because in the RCMP we have police officers who lift fingerprints at crime scenes. So they are police officers. They testify as expert witness in introducing fingerprint evidence. So it's not a civilian working for ABC company. It is a police officer, a sworn police officer, who attends a crime scene, lifts the fingerprints, collects DNA samples, and testify as such. So I think,
but that's a skill, right? That's not a going through all of the potential things that could cross. I think you need quite an intelligent person to do this, to be honest.
Well, I'm not saying police are intelligent. I think the point you're making, Michel, is I agree with Michel with collection of evidence. Of course, the police will still interrogate and discuss and collect the evidence. But when you are interpreting the results and testing, no policeman is going to come as a policeman to give expert evidence on comparative fingerprints. Say we get 7 points of identification or 12 points of identification. The expert will identify that. will testify on that. In the same way, no policeman is going to give evidence on DNA and whether the sample matches or doesn't match or what the contamination could be. So they may collect the DNA. I don't have a problem with that. And then, of course, it's the chain. If the chain can be shown to be have integrity and there's no breaking in the chain of collection up to the testing lab, fine. But they're not going to give evidence on the analysis of DNA. And in the same way, I don't think they can possibly give evidence on analyzing the results of. It can be used as an investigative tool to confirm their suspicions, just like polygraphs are at the moment. But when you're looking at expert evidence in court, I can't possibly think, especially not in most countries, how the police can be experts. They won't be experts on that.
I'll meet you halfway, Robin, and say that the police can be trained in collecting the memory, the brainwave and the P300 amplitudes and stuff, and have a trained psychologist that testifies as an expert witness.
Well, again, pushing back to you again, I mean, if the police have an incentive because we know this guy did it, we just need evidence to convict him, and there's often that mindset, who's to know that the test is going to be run with the correct procedures and integrity? Who's to know they're not going to falsify their approaches because they want a certain result? Independent unit will not want a certain result. They will say, this is a position, take it or leave it. The police have got an incentive to get a conviction because that's their job. I do not think they can get rid of unconscious bias or in some cases actual bias. And you as an ex-policeman may be high level of integrity, would never do that. I would suggest even you would have an unconscious bias if you think somebody is a particularly bad dude. Anyway.
Now I recognize the lawyer. I recognize the lawyer in you, Robin.
So I think Robin's concerned about corruption or bias. I'm concerned about incompetence.
Well, that's a combination, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even if the person thinks they're designing it right, they just didn't really sit out and plot it out correctly because. Unless they're a specialist that only does this. And, I would want someone there all the time going, well, hold on, did you think that maybe that might influence that? And, that's what I'm saying when I said, I think you need very intelligent people to plan what the questions are. And I wasn't saying that policemen weren't intelligent, but you need, a specific skill set to think. Specialists, yes.
Yeah. There are plenty of police specialists in many fields of investigation.
But they're not experts in DNA and in other scientific areas, and they will not be called as experts for that in court.
Maybe not, but they're the ones collecting the evidence, and that's where I'm saying
collection of evidence is no problem. Collection of evidence, getting evidence together, but actually preparing the test and applying the test.
Collect the evidence from the brainwave and just as much, and leave it to a psychologist to interpret the data.
But again, all right, we have to agree to disagree on that one. Put yourself in the position of a judge, okay? And you're giving fodder to defense lawyers here. I mean, I'll say, well, who applied this test? I did. Oh, and who monitored your application of the test? Nobody did. We did our own thing. So we don't know whether you applied each of those protocols correctly or just say you did. Yes, that's the end of your case. Anyway, that would be the end of the case if I were a defense lawyer anyway. That's the point.
To be seen.
Yeah. Well, the fun part for me is like as you guys are designing this, I want to keep trying to break it. So
exactly,
if I'm ever involved in this, please let me break it. Let me try.
Okay,
to break it.
Lee, the interesting thing is when we did our testing, because of the skepticism involved, there was a journalist from the United States who came to join us and sat through the development of the probes and the questions and the students and everything. He went through everything, and he wrote the entire. I must send it to you at some stage. Did I send it to you, Michel? I'm not sure if I did. But no. He did a guy called Tim Stello, based in the United States, and it might be worth getting him on your show at some stage, because he actually participated at every stage of our testing, and of the development of the questions, the interviewing of the students, He sat in on the actual testing of the students when they went through, having interviewed them and seeing what the scenarios were. And then he wrote an article on that, which I can forward to you if you're still interested. In one of the American, he did it for NBC, but then it was taken up by, I'm not sure which magazine it was in the United States, but it was published. And I found that very interesting to get his feedback on his take, because being a journalist, he would obviously come in as an investigative journalist. He'd be skeptical, looking for shortcuts and corners and things which didn't go well. And we were so confident, we said, you can have carte blanche, you can attend what you like, you can sit in any interview you like. And he sat in on many interviews, many testing, and he wrote a big article on this, which was very interesting. So in the same way, I think what came out of that was transparency and independence. And I think from what Michel says, it's all very well being independent, but you're also going to be seen to be independent. And I don't think it is run by the police. Apart from the competence aspects, I think there's a lot more to it than a week or two's training. I think you probably want to have a much more extensive training than that, in my view. But apart from that, there is the perception of independence, and if people's lives are dependent on a result where this plays a major part, there should be no doubt about the independence of the experts involved, in my view.
We'll agree to disagree.
Until you are the defendant.
So that's been about 2 hours, guys. So a good time to wrap. Do we get to everything? Any more questions in the chat? Ashley says the RCMP is in trouble. They often are, yes.
Yep.
Any questions about brain fingerprints or brain printing before? Yeah, Leia says, thank you all. This was wonderful. Yeah, it was really exciting. I honestly, when I knew you were coming on, I was like, oh man, I'm going to sit through science lessons. But no, it was perfectly conveyed. So thank you both for that.
At this point, Lee, I'd like to pay a special homage to a man that was really important to me, and that was Professor Peter Rosenfeld, who sadly passed away this past February. So he is the creator of the complex trial protocol. That's the scientific name of it, of his protocol. And I was probably the last person for whom Professor Rosenfeld was a reviewer of an article that was published. So and having spent a couple of months in his laboratory, I just want to pay homage. And he was a great man. He leaves a big hole in the science of brain fingerprinting, and he leaves a big hole, and he will be sadly missed.
Okay, I wish we had drinks, so to raise them to him.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't aware about that. I'm sorry to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lee, for having us on. I think it was a very stimulating discussion.
Yeah.
I didn't, and it's good to bring it out into the public and create a bit more debate around it.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Lee, for doing this public service, because this is a great platform to discuss and probably dispel some myths about brain fingerprinting, and as well to promote the potential of this technique.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Cheers.
Well, thank you very much. Take care, Lee.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
Thanks
Robert.
very much.